Chapter 1: The Outsider. Aurora kept her eyes fixed on the worn leather straps of her school bag as she walked down the grand hallway of St. Augustine's Academy, her shoes echoing against the polished marble floors. She was 15 now, but the walls of this elite institution still felt as cold and unwelcoming as they had 3 years ago when she first arrived. Her scholarship had been a beacon of hope for her family, a ticket out of poverty and into a world of opportunity. But for Aurora, it had been nothing short of a trial by fire. St. Augustine's was a school for the city's wealthiest, a glittering haven for the sons and daughters of tycoons, politicians, and celebrities. Aurora, with her plain brown braids and second-hand shoes, stood out like a smudge on an otherwise pristine canvas. Her scholarship covered the basics: tuition, uniform fees, and a few extracurricular activities, but it couldn't shield her from the scorn of her classmates. The students made no attempt to hide their disdain. They whispered cruel remarks as she passed, giggling behind manicured hands. Her desk was often defaced with crude drawings and curse words scrawled in permanent marker. The school bathrooms, meant to be a place of respite, had turned into her personal chambers of torment. More than once, Aurora had been locked in a stall for hours, her cries for help drowned out by laughter. The ringleader of this torment was Roma, a girl whose beauty and wealth cast a long shadow over everyone in her orbit. Roma's parents were the richest in the city, and she wielded her status like a weapon. She didn't wear the standard school uniform. Instead, she paraded through the halls in designer dresses, her every movement followed by the click of her custom-made heels. Her chauffeur dropped her off each morning in a sleek black car, and her family's butler delivered a gourmet lunch to her classroom daily, much to the envy of her peers. Roma had a posse, a group of boys and girls who orbited her like planets around a sun. The girls were her echo chamber, agreeing with every word she said, while the boys acted as her enforcers. They carried out her bidding with an almost pathetic eagerness, locking Aurora in closets, stealing her textbooks, and spreading vile rumors. "Don't go near Aurora," Roma had once announced to the class with a theatrical shudder. "She's probably crawling with fleas. You don't want to catch whatever she's got." From that day on, Aurora's desk sat isolated at the back of the classroom, a pariah's seat. The few brave souls who had initially tried to befriend her were quickly silenced by Roma's wrath. Aurora endured it all with a quiet dignity, her head bowed and her lips pressed into a thin line. She had no choice. Her parents had sacrificed so much to get her here. Her mother worked double shifts at a garment factory, and her father's health had deteriorated from years of hard labor. Failure was not an option. She reminded herself of this every morning as she tied her tie and smoothed out her blazer. Still, there were moments when the loneliness was unbearable. She often stayed late after school, finding solace in the library where she could lose herself in books. Stories of heroes and heroines overcoming impossible odds gave her a glimmer of hope, a belief that one day her situation might change. But for now, she was alone, an outsider in a world that didn't want her. Chapter 2: The Weight of Winter. Aurora pushed open the creaky wooden door of her small home and was greeted by a gust of cold air. Winter had arrived in full force, and the chill seemed to seep into every corner of their modest dwelling. She dropped her bag by the door and rubbed her hands together, trying to warm them. The house was silent, save for the faint creak of the old floorboards beneath her feet. Her parents were still at the factory, working long hours to make ends meet. The heater in the corner of the room sat idle, its oil reservoir nearly empty. Aurora's family had been rationing their heating oil carefully, but the biting cold was relentless. She wrapped a thin shawl around her shoulders and made her way to the tiny kitchen. There, she began preparing dinner for her family, her hands moving deftly despite the numbness in her fingers. She chopped vegetables with precision, boiled water for soup, and stretched the meager supplies as far as she could. Every meal was a careful calculation, a balancing act between necessity and scarcity. Her parents didn't know about the torment she faced at school. They didn't see the cruel graffiti scrawled on her desk or hear the snickers as she walked down the hall. They didn't know about the times she had cried in the bathroom, her heart heavy with humiliation. Aurora had made a choice to keep it from them. Her parents were so proud of her, their faces lighting up whenever they spoke about their daughter who had won a scholarship to the prestigious St. Augustine's Academy. They had told every relative, every neighbor, about her achievements. Aurora couldn't bear the thought of disappointing them. Once dinner was simmering on the stove, Aurora retrieved her school uniform from her room. The navy blue fabric was worn and frayed, with small tears at the seams where it had been tugged and pulled during the relentless bullying. She pulled out her sewing kit and began stitching the tiers with meticulous care, her hands steady despite the ache in her heart. Each stitch was a reminder of the cruelty she endured, but it was also a small act of defiance. She wouldn't let them break her. After finishing her repairs, Aurora sat down at the rickety table in the corner of the room and opened her math textbook. The pages were dog-eared and smudged from constant use. The upcoming math competition was her beacon of hope. The prize money, $100,000, was a fortune, enough to change her family's life. While the wealthy students in her class dismissed the competition as a trivial exercise, Aurora saw it as a lifeline. She pored over equations and formulas late into the night, her mind sharp and focused despite her exhaustion. The cold seeped into her bones as the hours ticked by, but Aurora didn't stop. She worked through practice problems, flipping back and forth between pages as she double-checked her calculations. She knew she couldn't afford to make a single mistake. The competition would be fierce, and her classmates, with their private tutors and endless resources, would be formidable opponents. But Aurora had something they didn't: desperation. This wasn't just about winning. It was about survival. By the time her parents returned home, their faces lined with fatigue, Aurora had already set the table for dinner. They sat together in the dimly lit kitchen, eating in silence as the wind howled outside. Her mother praised the meal, her father asked about school, and Aurora gave them her usual reassuring smile. "Everything's fine," she said, her voice steady despite the weight she carried. She couldn't let them see her cracks. Not now, not ever. After dinner, Aurora cleaned up and returned to her books. The hours stretched on, but she refused to give in to sleep. She had a goal, a purpose, and she wouldn't let anything stand in her way. Not the cold, not the bullies, not the exhaustion that tugged at her eyelids. The road ahead was daunting, but Aurora was determined to walk it, no matter how hard it became. Chapter 3: The Weight of Survival. Aurora's parents arrived home late, their faces weary from another grueling day at the factory. The three of them sat together at the dinner table, the meager meal a reflection of their circumstances but rich with the quiet bond they shared. Aurora watched her parents eat, the lines of exhaustion etched into their faces a constant reminder of why she needed to keep going. She was their only child, their only hope. Every day, she told herself the same thing: survive. She had endured 3 years at St. Augustine's Academy. She just needed to survive 3 more. That night, Aurora lay on her thin mattress, staring up at the cracked ceiling. The cold seeped through the walls, but she pulled her blanket tighter around her and forced herself to focus. Her resolve was her shield, and she clung to it. Whatever happened, she couldn't let her parents down. They believed in her, and she couldn't shatter their dreams. With that thought, she closed her eyes and drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, Aurora arrived at school as the sun barely peeked over the horizon. She walked through the gates with her head down, avoiding eye contact with her classmates. But before she could reach her desk, Roma's sharp voice rang out, cutting through the murmurs of the hallway. "Aurora! Come here," Roma demanded, her tone dripping with authority. Aurora's heart sank, but she obeyed, knowing there was no escape. Roma and her group of bullies were waiting for her, a smug grin plastered on Roma's face. They led her to an empty classroom, the door clicking shut behind them. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as Aurora found herself surrounded. Roma's cronies formed a tight circle around her, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Kneel," Roma ordered, her voice cold and commanding. Aurora hesitated for a moment, but she knew resistance would only make things worse. She dropped to her knees, her gaze fixed on the floor. Roma stepped closer, her polished shoes inches from Aurora's face. "Lick them," Roma said, a cruel smile spreading across her lips. Aurora's stomach churned, but she forced herself to think rationally. She had learned long ago that fighting back only fueled their cruelty. Bullies like Roma thrived on resistance. It gave them justification to push further. If Aurora gave them what they wanted quickly, perhaps the humiliation would end sooner. With her heart pounding, she bent her head and did as she was told. The room erupted with laughter, the sound echoing off the walls. Roma's cronies sneered, their taunts growing louder and more vulgar. Aurora's cheeks burned with shame, but she kept her focus inward, reminding herself that this moment would pass. It had to. When they were done, Roma waved her hand dismissively. "You can go now," she said, her tone dripping with mockery. Aurora stood on shaky legs, her head still bowed, and left the room. She could feel the stares of her classmates as she walked back to her desk. They knew, at least some of them, what was happening to her. But no one said a word. No one dared to challenge Roma. The first class of the day began, and Aurora took her seat, her body aching and her spirit battered. The teacher entered the room, his eyes briefly flicking over her. He must have noticed the dirt smudged on her face, the faint marks of shoes on her clothes, but he said nothing. Instead, he turned to the board and began teaching as though everything was normal. Aurora opened her notebook and picked up her pen, her hand trembling slightly. The weight of the humiliation hung over her, but she forced herself to focus. She couldn't let them win. Not Roma, not her cronies, not the indifferent teacher. She had to survive. For her parents. For herself. For the future she was determined to claim, no matter how many battles she had to endure. Chapter 4: A New Plot. Roma wasn't ready to let Aurora off the hook so easily. Seething with indignation, she gathered her gang together during a break, her eyes gleaming with malice. As they huddled in their usual corner of the school grounds, she sneered, "Aurora thinks she can just waltz into the math competition and win that prize money? I'd like to see her try." This competition was organized by the elites, for the elites. That money isn't meant for the likes of her. The group nodded in agreement, their faces lighting up with cruel delight as Roma's words sank in. "She should be grateful we even allow her in the same room as us," Roma continued, her voice dripping with contempt. "And yet, she walks around with her head held high, as if she's too good to bow before us. It's disgusting. She needs to be reminded of her place." One of Roma's closest friends, Claire, leaned in, her voice low but eager. "You're right. It's almost like she's daring us to come up with something new, as if she thinks she can endure anything we throw at her." "Exactly," Roma said, her jaw tightening. "She's not just ignoring us anymore. She's acting like she's some wronged princess, like we're the villains in her sad little story. It's time to bring her back down to earth. Permanently." The gang huddled closer, their whispers blending into a sinister chorus of schemes. Each of them contributed an idea, their collective imaginations churning out a plan designed to stop Aurora from even entering the math competition. They brainstormed ways to sabotage her efforts, from tampering with her study materials to ensuring she couldn't even show up on the day of the event. "She's been using the library after school to study for the competition, right?" said another girl, Lily, her lips curling into a smirk. What if we make sure those books she's using disappear? Better yet, one of the boys chimed in, we can leave her a little surprise in her locker. Something to remind her she doesn't belong here. Roma's grin widened as the ideas flowed. Yes, yes, and we'll make it impossible for her to even get through the front doors on the day of the competition. We'll show her that this isn't her world, and it never will be. The group laughed, their voices filled with cruel anticipation. They were thrilled by the thought of breaking Aurora's spirit once and for all. For them, it wasn't just about the competition anymore. It was about proving their dominance, about stamping out any spark of hope or resistance that Aurora dared to show. As they dispersed, Roma's resolve hardened. She could already see the look of defeat on Aurora's face, and the thought filled her with a twisted sense of satisfaction. This time, she wouldn't stop until Aurora was completely crushed. Chapter 5: The Day of the Competition. The day of the math competition finally arrived. Aurora's parents were up before the sun, bustling around their small home. They had prepared her favorite dishes, steamed dumplings and spiced porridge, hoping to fill her with energy and confidence. Her father had even made a special trip to the market the day before to buy new pencils, a sturdy writing board, and other stationery for her. "You'll do great," her mother said with a warm smile as she set the table. Her father added, "Just remember to stay calm and focus. We're proud of you, no matter what." Aurora nodded, trying to absorb their encouragement. "Don't worry, I'll do my best," she said, smiling back at them. She finished her breakfast, got dressed carefully in her patched but clean uniform, and packed her bag. Before leaving, she hugged her parents tightly, savoring the warmth of their love. As she stepped outside and left the familiarity of her community, her cheerful demeanor began to fade. She braced herself, her steps slowing as she approached the road that led to school. Her thoughts swirled as she walked, her head bowed to avoid drawing attention. If she won the competition, she mused, maybe she could finally leave this school. Perhaps she could go back to her old school, where she had friends and teachers who cared about her. She imagined telling her parents gently, perhaps framing it as a way to share all the knowledge she had gained over the past 3 years. Or maybe she could say she missed her old friends and teachers too much. But first, she reminded herself, she had to win. Aurora straightened her shoulders and tried to focus her mind. The math competition was her first step, her way out. She took a deep breath, her resolve hardening as she approached the school's gates. Just as she reached the zebra crossing near her school, her thoughts were interrupted by the roar of an engine. A high-speed car came hurtling out of nowhere, its driver clearly losing control. Aurora barely had time to react before the car slammed into her, the force of the impact sending her flying through the air. She landed roughly 50 meters away, her books and their contents scattering across the road like fallen leaves. Blood pooled around her broken body, vivid red against the cold gray asphalt. The world around her erupted into chaos. People screamed and cried, some rushing to help while others stood frozen in shock. Pain coursed through Aurora's body, sharp and unrelenting. Her vision blurred, and she felt her strength fading with every passing moment. In her final thoughts, she saw the faces of her parents, their pride and love shining brightly in her mind. A tear slid down her cheek as she whispered in her heart, "I'm sorry." And then, everything went silent. Chapter 6: Aurora's Soul's Journey. As the scene of the accident unfolded below, Aurora's soul drifted upward, leaving behind her broken body in the chaos surrounding it. Hovering above, she looked down with a mix of sorrow and disbelief. The sight of her lifeless form lying on the road, surrounded by blood and scattered books, filled her with unimaginable pain. Her thoughts turned to her parents, and the weight of their impending grief felt like a crushing blow. How would they endure seeing her like this? How would they cope with losing their only child? The mere thought of her parents seemed to pull her spirit toward them. In an instant, she was standing in their modest home, though they could not see or feel her presence. Her parents had not yet left for work. They were seated together, sharing a quiet moment over tea. Their faces were lit with pride as they talked about her. "Aurora is so kind, smart, and gentle," her father said, his voice filled with warmth. "She will definitely have a good life ahead. I wonder how we managed to give birth to such a brilliant daughter." "She's our little miracle," her mother added with a soft smile. Aurora's soul trembled with sorrow. The thought of shattering their dreams and leaving them in despair was unbearable. She wanted to reach out, to tell them she was still there, but her spectral form could do nothing but watch. Tears that were not truly physical streamed down her spiritual essence as she whispered, "I'm so sorry." Her thoughts began to wander, and she recalled the car that had struck her. A flash of memory came into focus, the color, the shape, the make. She concentrated on the image, and before she realized what was happening, she was transported to a different place. Now, she was hovering near a car that matched the one she remembered. A bald man sat inside, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He wore a mask, and there was blood spattered on the front of the car and the tires. Aurora's soul froze as the realization sank in. This was the car that had killed her. The man was speaking on a phone, his voice tense and hurried. "It's done," he said. From the other end of the call, a familiar voice echoed. "Whatever. My parents will take care of it." Aurora's soul recoiled in shock. It was Roma. The voice she had heard countless times mocking her, tormenting her, was now tied to her death. A surge of anger and hatred swelled within Aurora, hotter and more intense than anything she had ever felt before. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but instead, she was pulled again, this time to where Roma herself was. Roma was in a room filled with her usual group of friends. She clapped her hands together, a triumphant sneer on her face. "Well, that pest will not sully our school anymore," she declared. Her voice was dripping with disdain. Some of her friends looked uneasy, shifting in their seats and exchanging nervous glances. But others joined in with uncomfortable laughter and weak cheers. Aurora watched them, her anger boiling over. Roma's cruelty had always been a source of pain, but this was something far darker. Aurora could feel the weight of their actions pressing down on her, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly hate Roma. Her spirit pulsed with energy, as though her emotions were giving her strength. She glared at Roma, even though she knew the girl couldn't see her. But something in the air seemed to change. Roma hesitated mid-laugh, glancing around the room as if she felt a sudden chill. Aurora's presence, though invisible, was beginning to make itself known. Chapter 7. We finally meet. Something weird happened then. Aurora was pulled away from the room to an empty art room. There was no one but a boy there. She drifted closer and saw that it was the silent boy from her class. He was crying uncontrollably, clutching his chest in pain. His shirt was wet with tears, and he was bent down on his knees. Aurora wondered what his problem was. He was alive, after all. The boy, whose name was Edward, cried bitterly, "Please, God, bring Aurora back. Please, God, take me instead. I'll do anything you want, just bring her back. I beg you." Edward's cries shocked Aurora. She hadn't known anyone other than her parents cared so much about her. She moved closer to Edward, tried to touch his cheeks and soothe him, but her hands just passed through. His grief made Aurora very sad. For the next few months, Aurora seemed to be tied to Edward. Wherever he went, she was pulled alongside. Edward went to meet Aurora's parents every day. He comforted them. Sometimes, he even stayed over and made porridge for them, insisting on feeding them. He comforted them the best he could, urging them that Aurora wouldn't have wanted them to give up on their lives. Edward also anonymously exposed the bullying by Roma and her friends on an online platform with photos and voice recordings. This caused a huge public uproar. Roma's family tried to claim that she was being targeted at school by jealous classmates, but soon several other people from the school came forward and narrated their experiences of how they had witnessed or were bullied by Roma and her gang. Roma's family decided to send her abroad to finish her schooling so she would be kept away from public scrutiny. One morning, Edward woke up earlier than usual, got ready, and left his home in his car. Having no choice in the matter, Aurora was pulled along with him. Edward was calm and focused and seemed to be traveling in the direction of the airport. Aurora seemed puzzled. He doesn't seem to have packed to go anywhere, she thought. Before long, Aurora saw his car following another car. Aurora stretched herself and saw Roma in the back seat of the other car, sitting lazily. Aurora's soul froze. She screamed, "No, Edward!" But no matter what, she could not do anything. She tried to grab the wheel, but her hands passed through. Without any warning, Edward crashed his car into Roma's car. The accident killed both Roma and Edward instantly. Edward saw Aurora beside him and cried with happy tears in his eyes. He whispered, finally, and hugged her. Aurora whispered back, tears streaming down her face, "I want you alive. I want you to live. For me." They hugged each other tightly and cried, their emotions flowing freely in the silence of the afterlife. Chapter 8. A miracle happened. Edward and Aurora floated in the liminal space between worlds, their ethereal forms glowing softly against an endless expanse of light. Aurora's tears had not yet dried when the surroundings began to tremble. A warm, golden light engulfed them both, growing brighter and more intense. It felt like a gentle embrace, soothing the pain that had bound them for so long. "What's happening?" Aurora whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and fear. Before Edward could respond, a deep, resonant voice echoed all around them. "Your souls have displayed extraordinary compassion and sacrifice. The balance of the universe demands justice, but it also rewards those who act with pure hearts." Aurora and Edward looked at each other, bewildered. They reached for each other's hands instinctively, though they remained incorporeal. The voice continued, "Aurora, your life was unjustly cut short. Edward, your devotion transcended even the bounds of mortality. Thus, you are both granted a second chance." A radiant beam of light enveloped them, and they felt themselves being pulled downward, back toward the world they had left behind. Aurora gasped as her eyes fluttered open. She was lying in a hospital bed, her body wrapped in bandages but very much alive. The steady beeping of machines filled her ears. She blinked rapidly, trying to adjust to the harsh fluorescent lights above her. Slowly, memories of the accident returned, but they felt distant, like a bad dream. "Aurora." Her mother's voice cracked with emotion as she rushed to her bedside. Her father was right behind her, his usually stoic face etched with relief. They embraced her gently, tears streaming down their faces. How am I alive?" Aurora managed to whisper, her voice hoarse. Before they could answer, the door to her hospital room creaked open. Aurora turned her head, and her heart nearly stopped. Standing there, looking disheveled but unmistakably alive, was Edward. His eyes were red from crying, but the moment their gazes met, his face broke into a smile. "I don't understand," Aurora murmured as Edward approached her bedside. I was there," Edward said softly, his voice filled with wonder. "I don't know how, but I'm here too." Over the next few days, Aurora and Edward pieced together the events that had transpired. It seemed they had both been spared by some divine intervention. The doctors couldn't explain how Aurora had survived such a brutal accident or how Edward had walked away unscathed from the crash that had destroyed his car. But something had changed. Word of the miracle spread through the school and the city. Roma's car crash had drawn attention, and her family could no longer hide the truth about her involvement in Aurora's suffering. The recordings Edward had leaked became public knowledge, and the school faced immense pressure to address the systemic bullying it had ignored for years. Roma's family fled the country in disgrace, leaving behind a trail of apologies and bribes. The students who had participated in the bullying were expelled, and new policies were implemented to protect vulnerable students. For Aurora, life began to shift in unexpected ways. Here's Chapter 9, Into the Future. The past decade had been a whirlwind of change for Aurora and Edward. What once seemed like a grim existence filled with pain and injustice had transformed into a life brimming with hope, love, and fulfillment. Roma's downfall. In the foreign country where Roma's family had fled, her past sins caught up with her. It started subtly, neighbors whispering behind her back, her new schoolmates sneering at her, and the media running exposés on her family scandals. Roma found herself ostracized despite the wealth her family had flaunted. Her attempts to make friends only led to betrayal. Some posed as allies, feeding her false sympathy and assurances, but their real intentions were far darker. She fell into a trap one fateful night, kidnapped by those she trusted, and subjected to unspeakable humiliation. The videos of her suffering surfaced online, destroying whatever shred of dignity she had left. Her parents, consumed by shame and the weight of the consequences, quietly abandoned her. They withdrew every asset they could, sold what was left of their empire, and disappeared without a trace, leaving Roma destitute and alone. With no money and no one to turn to, Roma found herself on the streets, begging for scraps. The once proud girl who had lorded over everyone now faced the full weight of her karma. Her former classmates, who had participated in her schemes, fared little better, unable to find good schools or opportunities due to their stained reputations. A new dawn for Aurora and Edward. Meanwhile, Aurora and Edward's lives flourished. After making full recoveries, they returned to school together. The changes were immediate and profound. The public uproar had led to a complete overhaul of the school's administration. The new management enforced a strict zero-tolerance policy for bullying, ensuring that no student would endure what Aurora had suffered. Aurora received a substantial compensation package, both as an apology from the school and from Roma's family, whose wealth was seized after their flight. This money helped Aurora's family move out of poverty. Her parents bought a cozy house near the city, and for the first time in years, they could relax and enjoy life. Edward, who had been Aurora's steadfast supporter, stayed by her side through every challenge. Their bond grew stronger, blossoming into a love that neither of them had anticipated. They both excelled in their studies and attended the same prestigious university, graduating with top honors in their respective fields. Happily ever after. 10 years after the accident, Aurora and Edward were living their dream life. They had both landed well-paying jobs in the city, enabling them to live comfortably and give back to their families. Aurora's parents were regular visitors, doting on their grandson and soon-to-arrive twin granddaughters. Their home was filled with warmth, laughter, and love. On weekends, Aurora's mother often brought traditional dishes that reminded Aurora of her childhood. Edward would play with their little boy, a lively and curious child who adored his parents. Aurora often reflected on her journey, amazed by how far she had come. The scars of her past had faded, replaced by a deep appreciation for the life she had built with Edward. Together, they created a future that was nothing short of extraordinary, a future filled with love, resilience, and hope. Epilogue. One evening, as Edward and Aurora sat on their porch, their son playing with his toys, Edward looked at Aurora with a smile. "Can you believe how far we've come?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. Aurora took his hand and squeezed it gently. "It's hard to believe sometimes," she said, her eyes glistening with emotion. "But I wouldn't change a thing. Every hardship, every tear, it all brought us here." Edward kissed her forehead. "I'm so proud of you, Aurora. And I'm so grateful to share this life with you." As they looked out at the sunset, their son ran up to them, giggling. Aurora picked him up, holding him close. She felt the twin girls stirring in her belly and smiled. The future stretched out before them, bright and boundless. Life, once filled with darkness, was now a radiant tapestry of love and hope.